All right, welcome. So today is day 23. We're going to be talking about forensic entomology. Now, this might have been a day that you really enjoyed, and it might have been a day that you really disliked, but this was the day in which I brought in a bunch of decomposers, and I had you just interact with those decomposers during the entire hour. Now, obviously, you are not going to have that experience, but hopefully, throughout your childhood of you playing in the dirt and I don't know, going fishing and stuff like that, you will have some experience with these decomposers and with these insects, and this can really tell you a lot about forensics. So, what we are going to do is that we're going to go over two things. Specifically, first, we're just going to say what in the world is forensic entomology, and then secondly, we are going to talk about why in the world is forensic entomology such a great tool for just forensic scientists in general. Now, homework. The number one thing that we have for our homework is right here. It's your skeletal lab. This was a big lab that I really do think that we have the majority of it done. But here's the idea is that by the end of next Wednesday is kind of my idea because you have Thursday and Friday off of next week. I made an assignment onto Canvas and I want you to use that as a submission place for your lab. Now, the problem is that you have to have some sort of PDF converter in order to make it effective to turn it into this assignment. You taking a photo with your phone just like normally as a JPEG is not going to work. So my favorite immediately is this app. It's just Google Photo Scan and it works out really nicely. And that's just something in the App Store. It's for either iPhone or a Android, either one would be perfectly okay, and it works out really well right there. But download some type of program like that. It doesn't have to be PhotoScan exactly, and use that program to turn those pages into a PDF, and then you can submit it all electronically. So my idea, hopefully, is that you have that in by the end of next Wednesday. So that's going to be the end of the week next week. Now, I do know that some of you have it in already, but if not, just let me know. Ask me any questions we need. Okay? All right, awesome. So let's talk about forensic entomology. First off, we have to figure out what in the world is forensic entomology. And really, what it is the use of insects and arthropods to aid in legal investigations. Now, there are three main parts to forensic entomology it's damage to structures, damage to food, and then finally, human remains. Now, the main one that we are going to focus on, unfortunately, is right there. It's the human remains because we've been talking about anthropology for a long time now. It's been about 2 weeks, give or take. So we need to talk about the anthropological effects of insects and exactly how these insects play a role in our forensics and in forensic science in general. So what we are going to do is that we are really interested in two types of insects. No, unfortunately, we are not going to go and we are not going to be focusing on our nice pretty butterflies today. But we are focusing specifically on the kingdom Diptera and Coleoptera. These are flies and these are beetles, and they both are very important because of right here. These are just maggots, and you can see these maggots coming in mass and destroying. I can't even tell what this is in this video, if it's a structure, if it's food, what exactly it is. But either flies or beetles, both of them will go and lay eggs, and they have this cycle, and we'll get into the cycle later and how that helps us. But this is kind of the process. Now, what we want to do is that I talked about this last time. This is just kind of the order in which a remains, specifically human, will go through after death. And you can kind of go and you can see that there's different stages of it, trying to figure out exactly when do these insects take part in this entire decomposition process. So here's what I want you to do first. I want you just to pause the video. Think about what stage do you think these insects will really start to infest this body and tell us as much information as possible? Okay, so pause the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so do you have an answer? My answer, absolutely, unfortunately, is right here during putrefaction. Now, through putrefaction, the odor of decaying flesh is really, really important, as gruesome as that is, because you have to start thinking, how in the world do these insects and arthropods find and infest their food? So let's go over a little bit first. First off, I talked a little bit about the life cycle, and the life cycle is really, really important. This is of just the common housefly, and you can see that throughout the entire thing, you have eggs into larva, into pupa, into adult, back into the eggs, back into larva, back into pupa, and it's this big, big, big cycle. Now, I want to really, really think about two things in general. Let's just take the maximum amount of times for each of these. So we have 24 hours, which is just one day, plus 12 plus 12 is one more day, plus 12, it's just half, so I'll say half. Plus 24 is 1, plus 2 days, plus 3 days is 5 days in total. So if we add it up, 1 day, 2 day, 7 days, 8 days, 8.5 days. I want you to think, why in the world is 8.5 days kind of important then? What are you going to be able to tell in these 8.5 days just going through this life cycle then? What in the world can you, as a forensic scientist, get from this information? This is really, really important and kind of a big, big idea of forensic entomology. Of immediately, if the adult itself, thinks if it only takes 12 to 24 hours for an adult then to lay eggs, that can tell you a lot of information based off of just entomology in general. So what you have to think about is you really have to start thinking, what is a point in this cycle that a forensic scientist can really focus on? So this is where we're going from here. Now, time of death hopefully is your answer, because you can see even down here that the amount of time necessary, I think these are maggots again, the amount of time necessary will give you different variations and different ratios of eggs to pupa to maggots to larvae to full grown adults. Of if you've ever, like me as a kid, I used to have a leopard gecko and I used to feed it mealworms, which are just types of beetles and beetle larvae. And over time, they would go and they would, just grow. And I would be left with actual full size beetles after about like a 2 week time. And I kind of knew that time process and knew when it was time and being like, oh, well, I would open up the containers at the store to try and find the freshest larva for my gecko. But this is kind of the idea here, as gruesome as it sounds, is that through all of this, you can see the ratio as to what is the younger population of this insect to the older population of this insect is really, really, really important. It really does play a big factor on trying to figure out. So, what we are going to be able to figure out is that first off, you have to start talking time of death is really the main thing that we are trying to focus on. And you get to go and you say, okay, well, if it's an egg, then obviously it hasn't been there very long. If it's a pupa, it's a little bit longer. If it's a full grown adult, then it makes sense. But your main idea as a forensic scientist is to try to estimate the specific time of death because of it. That's the main idea here. Is that if you go back and you look at the specific ratio as to what you have of the eggs to the pupa to the adults, then based off of whatever species you have, be it a beetle or a fly, then you can instantly say, what's the maturation age? Is it only this 8.5 days that this fly takes in order to go and figure out the time of death? That's really, really important in forensics, and you're trying to figure that out. Now, there's a couple of problems with this. So I want you to think, what are some things that can really, really influence this time of death? I just told you one, And hopefully you could have gone and you could have been like, okay, some of the things that can influence time of death absolutely could be like the species as to what you have specifically for these types of insects. What else? If you really, really think about it, you're going and you're saying, okay, the species could affect it. Of hopefully another one that you're thinking of is specifically what type of species. So you can see that the common housefly itself, like the one that you all know, is really, really not that spectacular. That's what's, again, this video over here is just a common housefly going. But you can think flies arrive almost immediately, that within minutes you can have a fly, and this fly is going to go and it's going to surround and swarm this particular decomposing object and then feed on it. Now, this idea is that if you just have a species by itself, then the species dependent on fly or dependent on beetle all make a big, big difference. So, again, you will go, and if you spend any time outside for a long period, like me, I like to go camping and stuff like that, you are going to find these beetles all the time, sexton beetles, and they have this bright orange back and this blue or black, you know, lower abdomen here. And sexton beetles are everywhere, especially around here. And you go and you start thinking, I mean, they're so obvious because they have a bright orange back and they're, half an inch long, some of the sort. They're not that big, but you see them all the time. And specifically, you see them all the time whenever there's like rotting wood or lots of moss out, if it's just rained. And why in the world are you going and are you seeing those types of beetles at that specific time? So this is what you're thinking of. How does the species play a part? So, if you're a forensic entomologist, one of the things that you have to know well is you have to know your species and you have to know exactly what beetle you have based off the larva, based off the pupa, or based off the egg. And I know that can be really, really difficult. Something else that you hopefully are thinking about is the temperature. Temperature affects maturation rate. So, obviously, you can see the temperature in degrees centigrade, and remember, just 0 degrees centigrade is freezing, and it's just number of days trying to figure out how long it takes. So, the colder that it is, obviously, then the number of days, the longer amount of time it is going to take in order for that insect to grow. I mean, again, think like an incubator. If you have like chicken eggs, you have to put them into a warm area in order to grow effectively. It's the same thing with insects. So you start thinking a couple of things. Number one, that with all of this, if you have a specific insect of some sort, then obviously a higher temperature, so a higher temp is going to go and it is going to increase the maturation rate. That's a big, big, big idea, is that the warmer temperatures and the warmer climates are really, really going to increase the maturation rate of insects. So again, a really, really gruesome fact, but murders are actually unsolved more commonly in warm climates than it is in cold climates, specifically for this reason, just that the decay rate and that the rate in which that body is processed is increased in warmer climates than it is colder climates. So that's one thing. The species is one, the temperature is another. Something else that you can talk about is the habitat, and you say, what exactly about that habitat is going to change? Well, obviously, much like, our Midwest here, that different species and different types of insects are going to go and they're going to meet or, live in different habitats. So, like, just dependent again on the species, you can figure out the climate, the season, the habitat itself. Of not only can you determine the time of death, but you can determine lots and lots of things. Now, climate, season, habitat. Of unfortunately, the number one example is like if you've ever watched Hannibal Lecter, sheep something. But in that movie, they have a moth and they're trying to figure out where this moth came from, and it's a forensic countermeasure through all of it. But the entire thing is going and it's specifically saying, where in the world did this thing come from? So if you have a specific type of fly here, then this fly is obviously different than that fly, and that fly is going to come from this location, shade, sunlight. Does that mean that the body itself was dropped in shade? Does that mean it was dropped in a warmer or colder climate? Any of these can be really, really important to a forensic scientist just trying to piece together piece by piece by piece. Now, I want you to think, is this a type of individual evidence then? Specifically, does it tell you exactly, does it point to one person, or is it more class? Is it saying what type of evidence then is this forensic entomology? So think about that for a second. Now, one of these things that I'm going to talk about is how in the world do decomposers find their food? That's number one. Obviously, if flies, where is it, arrive within minutes, then these flies have to have some way to get there. But the problem is that if they arrive within minutes, how in the world do they get there? So why in the world do I have this giant earthworm photo or just pictured here on this slide? And you have to start thinking, well, does a giant earthworm have eyes? Does it have ears? Does it have, like, sonar like a shark or a dolphin? What exactly is it going to do in order to find that food and to find that food item quickly in, say, a couple of minutes or so? So this is the main idea. And this is one of the really, really fun things about your lab. So here's what I want you to do. Next time, I think this is a TikTok, unfortunately, as much as I hate to use it. But what I want you to do is that I want you, just next time, let's do it like this. Next time you find a ladybug, go grab a set of pins. And the reasoning for this is watch what happens whenever they draw for this ladybug. What do you notice? Do you notice how the ladybug just goes and it follows this pin line throughout the entire thing? It's the same way in which every single decomposer in the world finds its food. It's through scent, which is why a lot of the time you're trying to mask the scent of a crime. It's because your decomposers are going to tell you a lot. The type of species of fly or how many there are is going to give you evidence of any of these. So our friend, our giant earthworm here, or the friends that you would have had in your lab, they all follow through scent. And through this scent, it's really, really important, which is why if we go back all the way, it's really through the putrefaction stage of the body that these decomposers and that all of these insects start to go and gather towards this specific set of remains. This is the main idea. You're trying to figure out through entomology a couple of things. What's the time of death? Specifically, where did they, or where did this death occur? Possibly, or where was it dropped? When was it dropped? What was the climate whenever it was dropped off? Things of this nature can be really, really telling in a crime, and especially a violent crime in which you have remains. So this is the main idea. And throughout all of it, you find out a lot of information based off of it. But unfortunately, this is now the end of our anthropology unit. So I just want to do a quick recap with you as to figure out what exactly you can figure out just based off of remains alone. The first thing that we did was just skeletal. And skeletal remains can tell you like the age, the height, the gender, the race. Any of those can be really, really important and really, really telling. Or just the decomposition rate can tell you, again, cause of death, mechanism of death, manner of death. Trying to find, again, the approximate time based off of, like, again, just how long or what stage of death that body has gone through. These are our main parts until finally you get into our entomology. And the entomology, the number one thing they're trying to tell you is time. So time since deceased is a big, big one, or time since dropped off at the final location, or where the body was dropped off afterwards. Any of these are really, really important, or the approximate location. Has the body been moved? Has it gone from a very, very wooded type of climate to, say, an open field? Was there sunlight as opposed to shade? Was there a higher ratio of these types of flies or these types of beetles? All of these are really, really important and really, really telling pieces of information for a forensic scientist. Now, these are just basic things that we can find off of the body, but we're missing a big, big, big one. Think about it for a second, you know it. That's what we're doing next time. Next time, we are going to be talking all about DNA, what it is, how did we figure it out, just give you a brief history of DNA. This is the main idea. So, here's kind of your game plan and the goals for the rest of the week. What I want you to do, first off, is I really want you to think about and kind of organize and process the uses of forensic anthropology. It's a big, big, big part of forensics and telling really, really crucial information in a case. And then finally, I want you to finish up and submit that skeletal lab. I know some of you might have some questions about submitting an assignment through Canvas electronically, and especially an assignment in which has both, you're probably going to have two file types, would be my guess, of like a PDF of your actual photographs with all of your data, and then like say the Word document or Excel document, however in the world you have those 6 graphs at the end along with your questions. So if you have any questions, just let me know. But this is kind of where we're moving. I hope that all of you are still well. I really do miss you all. And that's all it is for today. So thank you again.